The music was loud. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off the marble walls, and in the middle of it all, a janitor stood frozen. His worn-out shoes left faint wet marks on the polished floor he had just cleaned. A mop rested loosely in his hand. His eyes, calm, almost too calm, were fixed on the man shouting at him. "Get out. You're fired. Right now." The room fell silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Because what the CEO didn't know would change everything in less than 5 minutes. Daniel Reeves was the kind of CEO people feared before they even met him. Tall, sharp jawline, suits tailored so perfectly they looked stitched onto his body, he carried power like a second skin. His voice didn't rise often, but when it did, it cut through people like glass. He believed in one thing above all: control. And tonight, at his company's annual celebration, control was everything. Across the room, near the service hallway, stood a man no one noticed. Or at least, they thought they didn't. Elias Carter. The janitor. His uniform was simple. Slightly faded. Sleeves rolled neatly. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost invisible. The kind of person people passed by without a second glance. But if anyone had looked closely, really looked, they might have noticed something strange. Elias didn't rush. He didn't shrink. He watched. Not like someone afraid of losing his job, but like someone waiting. The party was supposed to celebrate the company's biggest year yet. Profits had doubled. Investors were thrilled. Employees were expected to smile, laugh, and pretend everything was perfect. But perfection was fragile. And Daniel hated imperfections. So when a glass slipped from a young intern's hand and shattered across the floor, all eyes instinctively turned toward Elias. Without a word, Elias walked over. Kneeling, he began cleaning, carefully, quietly, as if each piece mattered. But then, Daniel noticed something else. A faint streak. A single line of water trailing across the marble floor behind Elias's cart. Barely visible. But to Daniel, it might as well have been a crack in glass. He walked over slowly. Each step deliberate. Each second heavier than the last. "You missed a spot." Elias paused. Looked down. Then nodded slightly. "I'll take care of it." Simple. Calm. But Daniel's lips tightened. "That's not the point," he said, louder now. "This is a high-end event. People notice things like this." A few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. Elias stood up slowly, gripping the handle of his mop. "I understand." But Daniel wasn't done. Because for him, it was never about the streak. It was about control slipping. "You understand?" Daniel repeated, louder this time. "Do you know how much this event costs?" The room began to quiet. Conversations slowed. Eyes turned. Elias didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Daniel, not defiant, not submissive, just steady. And somehow, that made things worse. "I asked you a question," Daniel snapped. Elias spoke softly. "No, sir. I don't know the cost." A faint smirk crossed Daniel's face. "Exactly. Because people in your position don't need to think about things like that." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Sharp. Someone in the crowd shifted. Another looked away. Elias said nothing. But his grip on the mop tightened ever so slightly. Then Daniel made a decision. A decision that would ripple through every person in that room. "You're fired," he said coldly. Effective immediately. A collective breath was sucked from the room. "You can leave. Now." For a moment, nothing happened. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the music seemed quieter somehow. Elias looked down at the floor he had just cleaned. Then at the crowd. Then back at Daniel. And for the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Not fear. Something deeper. Almost disappointment. He set the mop aside. Neatly. Carefully. As if finishing a task. Then he spoke. Are you sure that's what you want? The question was simple. But it landed strangely. Daniel frowned. Excuse me? Elias held his gaze. Are you sure you want me to leave? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Because there was something in his tone now. Something that didn't belong to a man who had just been fired. Daniel stepped closer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're done here. Elias nodded slowly. All right. And then, he reached into his pocket. At first, no one thought anything of it. Maybe he was pulling out a phone. A key. A badge. But when he unfolded the small, worn piece of paper, the room shifted. Because it wasn't paper. It was a card. And as Elias held it out, Daniel barely glanced at it. Until he did. And everything changed. Daniel's expression flickered. Just for a second. Then hardened again. What is this? He asked. Elias didn't answer. Instead, he looked past Daniel. Toward the back of the room. Where 3 people had just entered. Quietly. Almost unnoticed. But not by Elias. Because those 3 people weren't guests. And they weren't employees. They were the board. The room parted as the board members walked forward. Their expressions were calm. Controlled. But their eyes locked onto Elias. Not Daniel. Elias. Mr. Carter, one of them said respectfully, we were wondering when you'd step in. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Daniel turned sharply. Step in? What is going on here? The oldest board member stepped closer. He glanced at the card in Daniel's hand. Then back at him. You might want to read that more carefully. Daniel looked down again. This time, slower. And as the words registered, the color drained from his face. Because the name printed there wasn't just Elias Carter. It was silence. Absolute silence. A glass slipped somewhere in the distance and shattered. No one flinched. Daniel looked up slowly. This isn't possible. But it was. Elias met his gaze. Calm. Steady. I never said I was just a janitor. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the walls themselves were closing in on the weight of what had just happened. Daniel's voice faltered, You've been working here, like this? Elias nodded. For 6 months. Why? The question came out almost desperate. And for the first time, Elias's expression softened. Because numbers don't tell you everything, he said quietly. You can't understand a company from the top floor alone. He glanced around the room. At night, people talk. They're honest. You see how they treat each other when they think no one important is watching. His eyes returned to Daniel. And how they treat those they believe don't matter. Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of every word he had spoken earlier now pressing against him. I was protecting the company, Daniel said, weaker now. Standards matter. Elias nodded slowly. They do. Then, but so does respect. The simplicity of the statement hit harder than any accusation. I gave you a choice, Elias continued. A small moment. A simple decision. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. And I failed. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, at the employees, the interns, the staff. People who had watched. People who had stayed silent. "This wasn't just about you," he said quietly. The board stepped forward again. "Mr. Reeves," one of them said carefully, "we'll need to discuss your position." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. For the first time that night, he looked small. Not because he had lost power, but because he finally understood what he had done with it. Elias picked up the mop again. A small, almost invisible gesture. But it said everything. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," he said. "I'm here to remind you what kind of company this should be." He placed the mop back in the cart. Neatly. Deliberately. Then he walked toward the exit. Not rushed. Not triumphant. Just, steady. As he reached the door, he paused. "Without turning back," he said, "the way you treat people who can't do anything for you, that's who you really are." Then he left. And the room stayed silent. Power doesn't reveal character. It amplifies it. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the truth everyone else has forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories of kindness. And if you've ever experienced a moment like this, share it in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else.